So I thought I'd start in reverse today with the adverts to start with, just because often I know there are a few of you today, but just often people have to leave after 8 o'clock. Quite a lot of goodbyes, got to go to work. So I thought I'd just drop in the adverts for the last time at the beginning rather than the end. So the retreat that's happening in person, I think a little bit online, not the whole thing, at Adhisthana, Buddhism and the Big Questions. Sounds fabulous. Excuse me. And camping option, which in this weather would be very pleasant, I think. So do consider that, and there's the link there. If you may not know this, but if you click on a link, usually it opens itself behind the Zoom meeting. Occasionally it's in front and you have to fiddle, but usually it opens behind so that it's then available for you to have after the meeting. And the same with the Dana link, Nick, if you wouldn't mind sticking that into, and maybe stick it in at the end as well. So it's so easy to forget these things, or to think, oh, I can't deal with the technology, and then the moment passes. But if you click on the link, and then it's open for you once the session has finished, and then you can consider or find out more information about the retreat, and also hopefully feel moved to give some dana to the project to help its continuation. So thank you for in anticipation for whatever you are able to give, whatever you feel that you can offer. Okay, so exploring attention, day 5, drawing from Amishi Jha's book Peak Mind. It sounds like a mind that's in top tip condition all the time, which she says is not really what she's saying. But I suppose it's a mind where certainly we are more present to our lives. There's the attention systems are working better, supported by mindfulness. And one of the things that can, or that contributes to the attention systems being either overloaded or getting a bit stuck and blocked, is thinking. A lot of our experience, a lot of our experience becomes something that we think about. The mind loves to think, and nothing wrong with that. It's absolutely essential, but it can become overly dominant and cause us problems. So I'm going to come at thoughts and thinking from several different angles, drawing in the perspective from Dr. Jha in her book, and 3 different points. So the first one is, be quite familiar to most of us, the 2 different kinds of thinking. And I was having a look at the Veda Vitaka Sutta that talks about 2 kinds of thinking. This is from the Majjhima Nikaya, helpful and unhelpful ways of thinking. And this goes back, I think, how we discern that, how we recognize whether a way of thinking is helpful or unhelpful, is through sampajanya, through clearly knowing what's happening, and that quality, the juggler, that Amishi talks about. So they're both concerned with recognizing values and goals, is how we're thinking in line, or what we're thinking about in line with our overall goals and values. Our overall purpose. And that might be, in a quite specific way. You're doing a piece of work that really needs your attention. Perhaps you have a deadline, and you find yourself flicking around through different sort of social media pages, thinking about that. So there's an action involved too, so not such a brilliant example, but maybe you find yourself thinking about the holiday that you're going to go on, or something else. So not wise attending. The attention needs to be with the work, with the project, but instead you find it's with something else altogether. So this term for wise or unwise attention, yoniso manasikara is wise attention, and ayoniso manasikara, unwise attention. Another way that our attention is wise or unwise is that distinction I've made several times between are we aware of what's happening, or are we involved with, wrapped up in it, identified with it, identifying it as me, all about me. So these helpful and unhelpful ways of thinking, can talk about them in a couple of different ways. One is through mind wandering, which I'll come on to. That's what the mind does, it wanders a lot. But I wanted to just talk about a part of the brain that Amishi refers to. This is the default mode network, or default, yes, that's it. So it's the part of the brain, what they noticed in research was that there's this part of the brain that lights up when we're not doing a task particularly, or even when we are doing a task, but they would find this particular sort of part in the middle of the brain would light up, and they would say to people, what are you thinking about when that part of the brain is what are you thinking about at this moment? Because they could see that the brain was lighting up, and they would be, I'm thinking about what I'm going to have for lunch, or I'm thinking about what I'm going to be doing tomorrow. It was always when someone was thinking about themselves. So I find it quite amazing, actually, that there's this part of the brain that lights up whenever selfing is happening. That whenever the thoughts are revolving around me, or mine, me and those that I sort of identify with as sort of belonging to me. And it's interesting that this can happen during times of sort of when there's not much, we're not doing very much, or don't have a particular task, but that they can also happen regularly within the middle of a task, perhaps an important task. So this is what the attention system, this is why we want to use mindfulness to strengthen, because of this tendency of the mind to start thinking about me when there's quite a pressing need to be thinking about my job, or another person, or a crucial situation, or the road that I'm driving down. Yeah, it is a good description of thinking. Just to drop in, there was a question around what was the name of the sutta. It's the Dvaita Vitakka Sutta. Not going to ask Nick to try and spell that. It's not an easy one. Vitakka, Vittaka. Dvaita, you might be able to catch this, Dvedha, and then Vitakka. Majjhima Nikaya 19. You can look it up, the two kinds of thinking. So we have this default mode network. Brilliant. And that's partly how we keep the sense of self going, is through all this thinking about me. There's a really lovely book that I came across in the late 80s, I think, by a woman called Marion Milner. She published under the name of Joanna Field. And her book is called A Life of One's Own. I think it's a really lovely book. And when I read it, I thought, oh, she stumbled into mindfulness. So it was originally published around 1934. And she is known as a pioneer of introspective journaling. Otherwise, I would call what she does watching her mind. She's watching her mind. So she got curious about why she wasn't happier. She was a psychologist. She was very well educated, in quite comfortable circumstances, and had very high ideals, very altruistic woman, really wanting to make a difference. And she was very young at this point. She was maybe in her mid-20s. And she started watching her mind just because she couldn't work out. She wanted to see what was going on. And she was shocked to see, and she writes about just how much she thought about herself, her hairstyle, her new dress, whether so-and-so had noticed her, or, whether her boss liked her, all this very self-referential stuff we probably think of as quite normal, but she was just quite shocked at how much her mind was doing it and how different it was to her outward goals and ideals. So it just didn't fit at all with who she thought she was. So there's that sort of mind going on. The more sort of thinking about self in a very sort of heavily conditioned way. It's just very habitual. Where I've got quite a lot of light on my face, which I can't really do anything about. Marion Milner, or Joanna Field, that was her pseudonym. So come back to that sort of more sort of conditioned reactive mind, where the conceptual mind dominates in a bit. I think there's also mind wandering in the creative sense, and we can do this through letting the mind be free, letting us have spaces and gaps, and letting the mind be undirected and roam a bit. And I actually tested this out during my preparation for these sessions. I was thinking about a week ago. And so I just tested out sort of letting the mind wander without particularly going anywhere, not even trying to be aware, but just not giving the mind any other task. And I had in about 5 minutes, I had an idea for this particular session. So it was like a little sort of creative blip, sort of rising to the surface just when it had enough space. And I'd been feeling a bit stuck. I'd been feeling like I don't quite know where to go with this, what to do with this. Albert Einstein, someone known for his big brain and capacity for conceptual thought, he apparently said, daydreaming is the mind's only pathway to new ideas. Daydreaming is the mind's only pathway to new ideas, for creative breakthroughs, insights, new ways of understanding. So sometimes I think you can substitute a very sort of open awareness, but you're allowing the mind to go where it wants and to make its own connections, but not through trying to think something through. It's not, you're not thinking in a discursive, conceptual way, just allowing the mind, allowing awareness to make connections. So two kinds of thinking. The second point I want to make is around the storytelling mind. So Amishi Jha talks about this as simulation. So again, creating these stories about me, creating the sense of self through, we have a lot of momentary experiences. There's a clinging for security in the mind. Out of this raw material, we create stories, we create sort of simulations. And she defines simulation, or the words she uses in relation to it, are when imagined, remembered hypotheticals, or the conceptual mind in action, and projecting onto someone else's experience. Not exactly sure what she means by that, but I think we do it all the time, don't we? Oh, so-and-so, we imagine what they are also feeling or what they're thinking, usually about us in some way. So I want to quote Amishi Jha from the book, because this simulation is what happens when we're in the default mode. They're all sort of slightly different terms, but pointing to the same experience: mind wandering, simulation, story happening. So she says, this is from page 201 if you have the book. She says, without intervention, we live our lives almost entirely in simulation mode. We default to it almost automatically, and we do it constantly, effortlessly, and often unwittingly. It's very difficult for us not to simulate, to elaborate, to not generate, which is exactly why we need to train to be able to shift from that mode of simulation into a mindful mode, the mindful mode which is embodied without narrative, it's non-judgmental, and with no or low emotional reactivity. So all those things and they're connected with mindfulness that have come about, they've noticed through their research, and hopefully we know through our experience, that embodied without narrative, non-judgmental, and with no or low emotional reactivity. She goes on to say, we need to be able to shift out of simulation mode into a mindful one, so that we can open our eyes and see what is actually around us, rather than the virtual reality of our own making. That's quite a way to describe what's happening when the mind is just running around with its stories, mostly out of our conscious awareness, the virtual reality of our making. And she says the mindful mode, this capacity is becoming more and more essential as our world becomes more and more unpredictable through pandemics, through politics and other things. And I would add certainly climate change here. She says we cannot live in simulation mode through all these happenings in the world. To be resilient and capable, to preserve our attentional and cognitive powers, we have to be able to access the mindful mode. So she's not saying that we have to switch completely to the mindful mode. There's value in both. There's a lot of value in the conceptual mode, but it needs to be backed up by all the qualities that are more available to us in the mindful mode. So what happens when we're constantly in simulation mode? She has this idea she equates our working memory with a whiteboard. she says our working memory is crucial in as a sort of holding space before things go into long-term memory. Either they get discarded or they go into long-term memory. But ideally, you want the things that you want to remember and need to remember to go into long-term memory. So this is what we do when we're doing the mindfulness of breathing, if you like. We are constantly making sure that by coming back to the breath, we're refreshing, if you like, that mental whiteboard, that working memory. We're keeping the breath in mind. So constant activity or tasks overload our working memory. They overload this mental whiteboard. And you probably know it from the feeling of just feeling mentally full up, even after things that are beneficial. I did a few hours just creative work on the computer yesterday, but I was probably there for about 3 hours. And at the end of it, the mind felt tired. And it was very tempting to just carry straight on to the next thing, or to do something that I thought of as relaxing. Instead, I did something else, and I'll tell you about that in a couple of minutes. But maybe first to define what we're talking about with activity and tasks, because something like working on the computer is a very obvious task. But she defines things like, playing around on our phones is also a task. We're using those attentional systems. We're not allowing them to rest when we're checking emails, or we're checking our stats, or I check my stats on my blog, or something like that. Even the task of meditating isn't completely resting those attentional systems. So when the whiteboard, the working memory, gets overloaded, the consequences are something like this. Our ability to focus and be present is affected. We make mistakes and errors, so our judgment is impaired. And we experience more emotional reactivity, also impairing our judgment. And the last thing she says, we don't remember our life because the working memory is unable to lay down those long-term memories when the whiteboard is overloaded. Sorry, did I say working memory? The long-term memory is unable to lay down when the working memory is too full, when it's overloaded. So what helps? What helps? And obviously, practice does help. But what she's particularly advocating, in addition, is what she calls task-free time, known to Buddhists mainly as doing nothing, really doing nothing. Maybe a cup of tea if you're sitting out in the garden, but that's about it, really. And it's surprisingly hard to do. For most of us, it's quite difficult. And if you saw the interview with Amalavajra, when he was talking with Maitreya Bandhu in the seminar, he was talking about taking task-free time. And he said he can manage 12 minutes. He took the same amount of time as Amishi was talking about as the minimum that's been shown for mindfulness practice to be effective. Especially when he could feel the mind was a bit tired, a bit overloaded, and not able to take anything more in. That's a really big clue for us, when you just feel like, oh, I'm not really taking this person in anymore. I'm reading, but I'm not quite taking it in. I'm having to reread. So it's a really big sign that the whiteboard, the working memory is full. It's chocker, and so we need to sort of allow time for it to clear itself. So I've been practicing this as well after I heard about Vajra doing it. And as I said before, I was working really hard yesterday, and very tempting to then go, okay, I could go and lie on my bed for a few minutes, but usually I would probably be looking at my phone, or maybe I'd read something. And I just, this is about the third or fourth time I've done it in the last week. Just lying on the bed, not doing anything. My gaze sort of going a bit out of the window, but there's not much to see. There's a bit of sky, there's a bit of wall, there's a bit of roof. Just my eyes just going around the room, sometimes closing my eyes. And I was amazed how different I felt afterwards. I don't think it's always going to be so dramatic, but it really felt a clear difference, more refreshed, even though the actual experience was a little bit boring, and I was clock watching, I was checking the time to see if the 10 minutes I'd allotted myself was up. But the mind felt more present and more rested afterwards. So really, I think worth persisting with it. And I think the way that Amishi has framed it has helped me to be clearer why I'm doing it. What the value is, understanding the value of it. And that less overloading, just to remind you. So then, with the sort of state of mind that I had after lying down just for 10 minutes, I was then going on to meet a friend for lunch, and we were talking about various things, that it was important to be able to be present and attend to what she was saying. So less prone to errors, but the biggie, I think, is less prone to emotional reactivity when we're not so full up. So we're less likely to experience irritation or zoning out. And another biggie in the long-term mode, and this is the last thing I'll say before the practices, is this being more present to our lives and remembering our lives. And comes up a couple of times both in the book, I think in one of the sessions with Vajra. Here they talk about this soldier, very sort of high-ranking soldier, and his kids, when he's with his family, his kids describe things that happened when they were younger. They were family events. And he was there, he was physically present. He knew that, and the kids knew that, but he could not remember what they were describing. And it was quite distressing for him that, and he realized through learning about the mind, the brain, and how it's working, it wasn't that he couldn't remember. It wasn't that he had forgotten. It was that he had never laid down those long-term memories of those very lovely family events because he just was not present. He wasn't there. He was still thinking about work. His attention was elsewhere. I'm sure you can all think of times when, perhaps it's an event you've really looked forward to, and when it comes down to it, it's still, I find even with awareness, it still takes work to get the mind to be present, maybe during a concert or something. Mind goes off. Come back to using mindfulness practice, actually, so opening up to the mind is elsewhere. What else is happening? being present to that and re-engaging, allowing the mind to re-engage with the music, with being in a big concert hall, wherever it is. Okay, so before we move on to the practices, are there any thoughts about thinking, any comments or questions? I just put up the electronic hand if there's something. Okay, I take it you're ready to meditate then. Oh, Paul, there we go. Yeah.
Yeah, just you talking about this now makes me realize I used to run a business, and my children are grown up now, they're in their 40s, and I very much do concur with what you're saying, that your mind can be so busy with your external life and the things that you're planning and you're doing, and running a business, and you look back and you sort of think, well, what do I remember about their childhood? What specific events, and not just sort of little glimpses, but like when there's a section of stuff going on for say half a day with your kids, or a day, and you look back and you sort of think, what did we do? And you can't remember. And you sort of think, God, that sort of disappointment at the way that that sort of the mind, the working mind takes over, and you don't even realize. And it's only, as you're saying, you look back and you sort of think, what happened there? And so then the bits that you do remember become real gems.
Yeah.
And so I'm just saying that to younger people now, I suppose, is do take notice of this, because it's just, you don't get it back. You don't get it back.
Yeah.
You can appreciate appreciation of the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah.
For that.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe I'll just mention that figure again of the 50% of the time that we're mostly not present. Obviously, practice changes that, and I don't have any. I don't know how much research there is on giving statistics around that, but I think that can be sort of a comfort to. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat board. Well, that we're decreasing that figure. The more practice, especially sort of the mindfulness practice, open mindfulness practice, then we can increase our ability to pay attention. So, Helen, you want to unmute yourself? Yeah.
Yeah. I was just wondering about the difference between this untasked sitting and power napping, because I find if I go into untasked sitting, I then go into power napping, and just the differences.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't know. She doesn't really, or from what I remember, it's not talked about in the book. I have a similar question myself, because sometimes I find the same thing. It might actually be longer than that. I might be present for 10 minutes and then I'll maybe drop off if I've got a bit more time. What's your experience with power napping in terms of how the mind feels, or does it feel refreshed? And
I find it very refreshing. I've been power napping my whole life for up to half an hour. So
yeah,
I find it very, I used to, when I was working long hours, not be able to get through a day unless I could power nap sometime during that day.
Yeah. I don't know if it would have all the benefits, but I'm sure that it would have some of them, just because the mind is not on a...
It reached the point where I could almost physically feel it just going woof, and then I could wake up and get on with my day.
Yeah, great, thank you. Okay, let me just look at that question that I think Vicky put in the chat. The risk of meditation becoming a task of some sort that gets in the way of forming long-term memory. Actually, yeah, I don't know that she says much more in the book. What I remember Subhuti saying, and also this is a bit my own experience. Subhuti says something like, if we are always directing the mind in practice, it creates feeling of strain. So what this does for me, it points to the importance of just sitting type practice. And this is what he says, really, Subhuti says. But yeah, if we're always giving them, if we give the mind the task to be aware of the breath, or to go through 5 stages of a metta bhavana practice, it is benefiting the mind. There's no doubt about that. But it's not resting the attentional systems. And that's what's being said here. So undirected practice, where you allow the mind to do, to go where it wants to go, but with a very, very light awareness. I think that's helpful. And that is perhaps more helpful in this area of helping the whiteboard sort of clear itself. So perhaps our practices are helpful in different ways, because the mindfulness of breathing and metta bhavana practice are helpful in training our attention. They train the attention to come back to the present, to direct where we want the attention to go. The undirected attention is more helpful in this. Well, it's helpful in a different way, in that we see what is happening when we're not directing the mind. So we get to see the mind in its natural state, and how the mind body, how that relationship or that interrelating is going on. So it's more of a wisdom practice in that way. And it has the benefit of lessening that load on the attentional system, as long as the awareness is very, very light, very open. So hopefully that gives a bit more sense. It's not that meditation is a bad thing. That's definitely not what she's saying. It's not what I'm saying. But that we can do meditation in quite a task-oriented sort of way. I've got to, I've got to do it. So we can just approach it in a way that's more or less task-oriented, I suppose, as well as the type of practice that we're doing. Hopefully that's clear. Okay, so I'm going to do a couple of practices, but again, just with a very slight pause in the middle, just to change gear. So the first practice we'll do is one of labeling. So labeling the types of thoughts that we have. So we sort of ring fence them, and if you like, we're protecting the mind from being lost in the contact. So I'll give you some examples of labels before we start. So a very simple one, when the mind goes into the past, find yourself thinking about the past, remembering. So there's the remembering something that's already happened. Or the mind might anticipate, go into the future, something that's going to be happening later today or later in the weekend. So anticipating mind. Planning is also a great sort of futuring one. Repeating when we have thoughts, the same thought again and again, or thought about the same topic but in a very similar way. Sometimes I find this with if I'm going on a journey, then the mind will sort of keep coming back to different aspects of, oh, and then I've got to check, I've got a short change here, and yeah, all sorts of detailed planning. The judging mind, very, very helpful to label the mind that is quite critical. There's that critical voice in the mind that's judging how we're practicing, judging what we're thinking about, judging someone else. So judging thoughts, really helpful. Comparing, wanting, not wanting. I'll not say any more now, but I might drop in a few as we go. And so we just use these labels very, very lightly. And they can sort of circumvent and just make it very clear that we know what the mind is thinking about, but without going into the content. And then we'll go into a practice that looks a little bit more at the nature of a thought in experience. So drawing on our direct experience. So if you'd like to set yourselves up for practice. So letting the mind settle. Body and mind. Simply letting them be as they are. And this is very restful for the mind, not be trying to do anything in particular. Coming to some sort of doing, noticing from a place of simply being present, relaxed, natural. And when we're looking at thoughts, it's helpful to really let that settling in the body take place through the touch sensations, and perhaps through hearing as well. Thoughts are quite subtle mental events. And so it's helpful to be settled and grounded, embodied. So the body acts like an anchor for the mind. as you settle and ground in the body. You may well also notice thoughts in the mind. Don't go looking for them. But when we allow the attention to be quite broad and quite soft, thoughts can be known and noticed. You might just catch the tail end of a thought. Or on the other end, the spectrum, wake up into a moment of presence in the middle of a story, in the middle of a simulation. Whichever it is, or anything in between, it's not a problem. Thoughts are not a problem. We're simply learning to notice them in awareness. Notice the habits of the thinking mind. Thinking, imagining, repeating, planning, judging. And just let the label be very soft and light. Labeling's a short-term strategy, just to help us get to know the processes of the mind. So we're able to train the mind not to immediately dive into content and story. Labeling can also help us not take our thoughts so personally. It's simply a moment of remembering in the mind or anticipating or judging. Conditioned habits of mind that can be recognized through being aware of thinking. If you find that the mind is sort of snapping at thoughts, jumping on them a little bit, just really settle back in mind and body. And perhaps being aware of the quality of the awareness, the quality of the mind that's noticing, observing. Rest in that. And don't worry if you find that you've become aware of a thought just after you've had the thought. Over time, the mindfulness becomes more subtle to match the subtlety of the thought, the object. And it can be helpful, especially if you find yourself getting caught or lost in thoughts very frequently, helpful to go between noticing the mind and reconnecting and grounding in the body. Let go of thoughts for a few minutes, settle in the body. And at some point, opening up to broader sphere of experience. You might notice thoughts about practice. You can label them practice thoughts. Or simply thinking. Now, while staying in your posture, just allowing the mind to be task-free for a couple of minutes. Not doing anything in particular in the practice. Is it even a practice at this point? Simply being. Let's see if it's possible now to perhaps keep something of the quality of that task-free mind, while really gently noticing what's happening around thoughts. You don't need to use any labels in this particular practice. We're just going to be looking in a very open way at the nature of thoughts and thinking. So you might notice how thoughts come with a variety of types of feeling and variety of energy with them. Some thoughts are quite loud and intentional, a strong energy, strong emotional feel. And they're usually quite easy to recognize. Other thoughts are much lighter, almost float through the mind in threads, quite loosely connected. And sometimes we can connect with a subtle inner narrative that feels like it's always going on. We don't always have to try and make sense of a thought, its conceptual meaning. But perhaps tuning into what a thought feels like in the mind. And looking really gently out of the corner of the mind's eye. Like looking at a shy animal in the wild. We can't look too directly, too obviously. And you might notice that a thought isn't just words or images in the mind. There are other fragments of experience that form an inner language, a sense of knowing, different perceptions, feelings, some sort of inner direction or impulse in the mind. being curious about a thought. And allowing thinking thoughts to fall apart under a soft, open, curious attention. Being curious about how you know you're thinking, how you know that thinking is happening. And taking your time to relax into task-free space again. And notice if there's some awareness, a momentum from the practice that's naturally there. Task-free space with your eyes open or closed. And I'll drop a few words into that space from Thich Nhat Hanh. And he's talking about meditation, mindfulness meditation. Our thoughts and feelings are like a river. If we try to stop the flow of a river, we will meet the resistance of the water. It is best to flow with it, and then we may be able to guide it in the ways we want it to go. We must not attempt to halt it. Keep in mind that the river must flow and that we are going to follow it. We can be aware of every little stream that joins it. We can be aware of all the thoughts, feelings, and sensations that arise in us, of their birth, duration, and disappearance. Do you see? Now the resistance begins to disappear. The river of perceptions is still flowing, but no longer in darkness. It is now flowing in the sunlight of awareness. To keep this sun always shining inside of us, illuminating each rivulet, each pebble, each bend in the river, is the practice of meditation. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes. If anyone has anything they'd like to say, maybe something that you noticed from the practice caught your interest, or a question, comment. When you're ready, you can put up those electronic hands. Jess.
Thanks for that, Vajradevi. It's been a really nice week, so thank you. One question I've got is, for the last sort of year or so, on and off in meditation, I've been getting an almost sort of unbearable feeling of physical tension that comes up when I meditate. I'm trying different things to experiment with how to respond to that, but I wondered if you had any thoughts.
What sort of things have you tried? Maybe it's a good start there.
So I've tried, because sometimes it's accompanied with heat. So I've tried to sort of meet it with cool calmness. I've tried to go with the feeling of heat and tension, just experience it fully. Sometimes I've just got this real desire to just lie down. Sometimes I've just lied down and just fallen straight asleep. So yeah, I've just been. There was one time when I said, "I'm not afraid of you," and then it sort of really sort of melted away. But when I've tried that again, it hasn't had the same effect. So it's yeah.
And is it tension in your body or in the and in around the head as well?
No, it's mostly sort of in the torso, sometimes my legs and feet.
Yeah.
But it's very strong, it's really strong. So it's just how to sort of be with that, because it sort of makes me want to finish the practice because it is so strong.
And that might be a good strategy actually, just in a way to reassure yourself that actually you can leave whenever you want to. You can, and it might be a short-term strategy, but that you're not sort of building more tension through saying I have to be here for a certain length of time. I have to actually at any point you can decide to go. Maybe you go for a walk or something that's you can still be aware. You can still take awareness into that, but it's something that's moving. And I've also worked with a lot of tension over the years, and actually, well, I found walking meditation really useful and for that. But just it's perfectly acceptable to sort of just carry that awareness through a different posture, through walking or through standing or lying down. But yeah, that permission to end the practice. Something that in undirected practice that we do a lot of is to watch how the mind is relating to what's happening. So you don't, this is a different point. So you don't put much attention on the tension, if you like, or on pain, if there's physical pain. What that can do, if the mind is directing its attention to something that's uncomfortable, we can miss the sense of what's happening in the mind, and often there'd be quite a lot of maybe worry or aversion. Not wanting this experience. So if we can turn the attention to noticing, that's part of it. There's part of the mind that's not wanting. What's that like? What does that feel like? Is it possible? Can I be with that sense of resistance or not wanting? Sometimes for me, there's been other things like stoicism or resignation as part of the it's not acceptance. It's not really a willingness to be with it. It's something else, and it's helpful to identify all those things that are happening in the mind from a quality of awareness that's not of the same nature. Its nature is simply to know, to recognize, to accept what's happening. So I find personally that can be really helpful strategy. It can also reveal that I'm doing this in order that the tension goes away. So that's something to watch, because that will also be part of keeping it going. And like you said, when you found something that worked and then the next time it didn't work, it's because we can recognize those type of expectations in the mind, and that sort of bargaining mind that I'll do this so that will happen and this unpleasant experience will go away. So some degree of acceptance that this is what's happening in experience. It's not wrong. It's unpleasant. It's come about through certain causes and conditions, and in a way, what we do when we look at the relationship to experience is that we're able to recognize some of those conditions that are contributing, some of the mental attitudes that are contributing. Yeah. There's a lot more I could say, but I won't say anymore. But that whole general area, which I have written about, actually, I think I've written about in my book. But yeah, of just how we're relating to what's happening is a very big one.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Shakijata, would you like to unmute and speak?
Thank you. Yes, that was wonderful. I know that I can deliberately shut my mind down, just for a few minutes, like when I lie down on the sofa or something like that, and I can just sort of stop my mind being active, go into silence just for a short time, but it's quite sort of deliberate. Do you think that's useful or not?
I don't know. Does it take a lot of energy? It's sounds like it might do, but yeah. What's happening when you do that? How do you do that? Or what do you do?
Well, it can be a relief, actually, particularly if something really difficult is going on. And I think, I do tend to feel in a better mental space afterwards, just for a short time.
Yeah.
But I just wondered, I suppose, if it was harmful or whatever. I don't feel that it is, actually. But it's not quite what you're talking about here, is it?
No, but that's why I'm curious about what you actually, how do you shut your mind down? What's happening? And maybe you can't say, maybe but it would be interesting to notice. What do I do here? And maybe for yourself, your overall feeling is that it isn't that it's helpful. But you can get curious about what's going on here. What am I actually doing? Because there'll be some mental processes going on, or the attention going somewhere. So getting curious about that, and then maybe see for yourself: are there some helpful elements in it, or not? Because the language that you're using is quite strong. Shut the mind down.
Yes.
But that doesn't sound particularly positive, but it may be that the experience is. So I don't want to sort of weigh in too quickly on the side of good or ill.
Right. Yeah, but just be curious.
Yeah.
I think the curiosity will really help.
Yeah. What does that mean to you in experience, to that shutting the mind down? And maybe there's another way of describing it. Once you're curious about the experience, it may be that you describe it in a different sort of way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. Well, I think we're pretty much at the end. Very good to have been with you all through the week. Some of you dipping in and out. And the recordings are up there. If great, Dana link again, excellent. And so the recordings are up on YouTube. If you missed some earlier in the week and you want to check them out, you can do that. Yeah, also Marion Milner's book. And there's a lot of other stuff from the Nature of Mind project, which certainly I want to check out for myself. Some of the different interviews and the different weeks of masterclasses. So it's all up there, all available resources to help us. So I'll leave you now. It's been great, actually. I've enjoyed it, despite the early mornings, which are really not my choice. Maybe the next time we have masterclasses, we could have them at 6 o'clock in the evening or something. But anyway, have a good rest of your day. And yeah, I'm sure I'll be meeting some of you before long. Okay. Yeah, feel free to unmute to say goodbye to.
Thanks, Vajradevi.
Thank you so much.
Very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you
you
so
so
much.
much.
Really amazing week.
Bye bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye everybody.
It's lovely to see you.
Great to see you all. Hi, Fee.
Go well.
Go well, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you. And
Bye
goodbye.
bye. Bye. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.